Welcome everybody to a webinar from the American Nuclear Society's Risk-Informed, Performance-Based Principles and Policy Committee, RP3C. My name is Kadambi and I'm chair of RP3C. The purpose of RP3C is to help modernize ANS standards. Modernization has come to mean that risk-informed and performance-based methods are employed to overcome the difficulties that we all know about with purely deterministic and prescriptive methods. We've been calling these methods RIPV approaches for short. The Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act specifically recognizes a role for RIPV approaches. There's a lot of guidance available on approaches, but most people have not had reason to become familiar with the guidance because the conventional approaches still dominate most things that we do, including standards development. Right now, ANS can be considered as a knowledge center for RIPB approaches. Today, the session, let me say, RP3C initiated these community of practice webinars on RIPB to enable practitioners of RIPB approaches to share their knowledge and experience. And we've been scheduling these on the last Friday of every month. So today, the presentation is going to be by me, and I'm going to be joined by Rani Franovich, and we will jointly provide a presentation on the subject of a performance-based approach for 10 CFR Part 53. I'm not sure why Rani's name doesn't show up on this part, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Next slide, please. Oh, there you go. Okay. Okay, so the word transformation has become very common in recent years. The NRC on its website states that transformation is needed to help it regulate an industry that is innovative and has new technologies. Now, NEMA, that's the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act, requires that NRC's transformation activities lead to certain results. And I believe some of us think that this can only happen if, as part of the efforts, NRC includes a role for performance-based approaches. A successful Part 53 will provide flexibility as well as encourage and reward improved safety outcomes. Next slide. So this is just getting into the regulatory history a little bit. The direction setting that the Commission pursued in the late 1990s is very relevant today. The white paper on risk-informed and performance-based regulation defines terms and the Commission expectations for risk-informed performance-based regulation. And this formally recognizes, I believe, a performance-based approach. The white paper defines a performance-based approach and should provide the basis for all stakeholders when they use the term performance-based. Next slide. The Commission's vision for a relationship between the NRC and industry, I believe, is a little bit different from the conventional views associated with just compliance with the regulations. The Commission's vision is based on producing improved safety outcomes. Encouraging and rewarding licensees to produce better safety outcomes requires consideration of margins. The interpretation of the Commission's definition of performance-based approaches results in the concept of a framework to avoid safety concerns. Next slide. The imperative for a performance-based approach is to hold applicants and licensees accountable to producing results that reflect success of safety efforts. The success should be defined by clear outcomes. It should be possible to observe cause and effect relationships among these elements of the structure. Avoiding unnecessary requirements should be something everyone agrees on as part of improved outcomes. Next slide. So the NEMA, of course, requires using, I believe, the language used in NEMA, uses risk-informed and performance-based that has been formally defined by the Commission in the white paper. But the thing is that this white paper was issued 20 years prior to the legislation. So the flexibility that is called for in NEMA, I believe, implies the use of margins the way the white paper is directing the efforts towards risk-informed and performance-based regulation. So what this means is that where there is more margin, there can be more flexibility. Where there is less margin, it implies less flexibility and therefore more prescription. So existing and as well as new technologies should benefit, as the legislation, I believe, requires, use of risk-informed and performance-based methods. Next slide.
Arsad, hi, this is Amir. How do you want us to interact during this presentation? I want to make sure that we don't lose the opportunity to have a good conversation, robust conversation. So how do you want us to handle it? Do you want us to wait until it's done?
Yes, please. As Pat said in her introduction, we are requesting that people submit questions in the chat window, and we'll take up the questions, as many as possible, as we go through the later part of the presentation. So,
okay, thanks a lot. I didn't see the note. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Okay, sure. So I don't know if Rani Franovich is on yet, but anyway, these were things that Rani covered at a meeting yesterday, and she was going to cover this. But basically, this pictorial, which I borrowed from Bill Reckley, who generated it for the standards program, shows the two-dimensional view between prescription and deterministic approaches. And, basically what I think we are looking for is some kind of a sweet spot that uses both both kinds of ordinates and recognizes that some degree of prescription is probably necessary in order to have a regulation that has shall statements similar to the way standards work. So what this shows is that there's a continuum between deterministic and risk-informed, and then the risk itself is defined as clearly in terms of what it is that the information is going to be used for. Next slide. This pictorial is borrowed from a presentation that Kent Welter of NewScale made, to one of our community of practice sessions very early on. And it shows what I think is the way an applicant or licensee would be looking at managing the requirements associated with their reactor product development. And it basically is a hierarchical relationship, and it goes from the highest level mission requirements and covers levels of detail that go down into actual detailed requirements that that are based on the needs of the applicant and the project itself. So next slide. So what we suggest is that a similar approach to requirements management can be part of the way Part 53 approaches building the regulatory requirements and the guidance documents, that would support the requirements, the regulations. So this shows that what should be in the rule is at the highest level, and there would be a transition that would gradually, be based on applicants exercising their flexibility and reflecting their needs at the lower levels. Next slide. So the Commission's expectations as defined in the white paper, and I think somebody asked the question, what is the white paper? Well, when I say the white paper, I'm sort of assuming that people know that there is a document, the staff requirements memo for SECI 98-144, that is entitled the White Paper on Risk-Informed Performance-Based Regulation. Perhaps I shouldn't have assumed that, but it's generally sort of well known among the people that that are in this field. But anyway, so the point is that the staff developed in NUREG BR 0303 guidance that fulfilled an action item that the Commission gave to the staff to develop such guidance. This guidance went through the detailed process, including public comment, a public workshop, and ACRS review, and was made available for use in all areas of NRC regulation. An appendix in this guidance document, Appendix B, covered reactor-related issues, and it offered as an example the reactor oversight process, which we will be covering multiple times during this presentation as an example of how the structure reflecting the Commission's definition of a performance-based approach could work. And also how this structure can reflect the ACRS recommendations that I think implicitly cover requirements management as well as defense in depth. And we'll get into that a little more. So next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. The framework itself uses the concept of an objectives hierarchy as the basis. An objectives hierarchy is a structured set of performance objectives that leads to logical decisions related to safety. As depicted in the requirements management pyramid, it covers many levels of detail. The achievement of these performance objectives would be supported by actual observations and would be the basis for decision making. Next slide. Let's see. Yeah, the guidance employs decision theory to enable use of formal methods which could be important for use in licensing. And this is the role that it might play when one is optimizing between performance objectives that could be considered to be in tension with each other, such as safety and security and safety and economics. The hierarchical construct offers a way to address prevention and mitigation aspects of defense in depth. Next slide. So this is again an actual reactor oversight process structure as it appears in the NRC documents that support the ROP. And it shows the highest level objective of public health and safety being adequately protected, supported by three strategic performance areas, which are in turn supported by 7 cornerstones for safety, as they are called. Now, in the language of the objectives hierarchy, we can think of the strategic performance areas as the fundamental objectives, and the 7 cornerstones as means objectives. Now, these are, the terms that are again explained further in NUREC BR 0303. Now, all this is supported by what you might call the programmatic controls, that an operating reactor these days would have, such as problem identification and resolution, the safety conscious work environment, human performance, etc. So, this is again an example of how the objectives hierarchy might work. Next slide. And further, how the objectives hierarchy may be decomposed is shown by one of the safety cornerstones, mitigation systems performance over here. If that is considered the performance goal, and how that might be decomposed into the actual kinds of the hardware and the supporting programmatic elements, that would ensure that the performance objectives related to mitigation system performance are accomplished. And what this pictorial also tries to depict is that there is a continuum between where greater degrees of prescriptiveness may be appropriate, and where the opportunity to be more performance-based may arise higher up in the objectives hierarchy. Next slide. Okay, I see Rani has joined us now. Okay. Anyway, I don't know, Rani, if you're able to access this slides. Are you able to see that?
I do. I do.
Okay. I'm now on slide 16, I believe, and I'll cover this. So the structured performance objectives are logically related to one another. So this is the way the cornerstones are logically related to the fundamental objectives, and how the objectives hierarchy under the cornerstones might look like. The example shown was the mitigating systems. So the lower level objective represents a logical decomposition from the upper level objectives through functional analysis. So the 7 cornerstones, as part of the decision making, in fact, are the necessary and sufficient performance objectives to meet and reach the highest level objective of reasonable assurance of adequate protection. And one can see that there is a graded scale in the level of detail that would be associated with this hierarchy. And as a general matter, the observation is that greater the level of detail, the more prescriptive the requirements are likely to be. Next slide. So the dependencies between the reactor safety and safeguards are really defined by the lower level elements. And if there is a balance that is required between the higher level performance objectives, then an integrated decision-making process would be involved in order to achieve this kind of balance. And the guidance in UREC BR 0303 offers a kind of process that one can use for this. And in terms of providing for defense in depth, the structuralist view of defense in depth is accomplished in this methodology by the higher level objectives being achieved by multiple lower level functional objectives. Next slide.
Do you want me to cover this one,
Yeah.
Prasad?
If, would you like, are you able to?
I am, thank you. And apologize, I apologize to everyone that I've joined late. I was at a meeting with some folks in DC and we just wrapped up a few minutes ago, so apologies. So this slide represents the same objectives hierarchy that's used for the Reactor oversight process on slide 8. And it follows the same requirements, management pyramid structure presented in slides 6 and 7 that Prasad covered while I was otherwise detained. As Prasad mentioned, level 1 objectives should be prescribed in Part 53 to establish what is necessary and sufficient for applicants to include in their submittals and for NRC to review and justify a licensing decision or safety finding with, as Prasad mentioned, reasonable assurance of adequate protection. Level 2 outcome objectives may also warrant prescription in the rule, but beneath level 2, operational programs are depicted, and these programs encompass a wide range of facility operations. Performance attributes for operational programs are important and provide clarity, stability, and predictability. However, these attributes can be described in regulatory guidance documents to afford greater flexibility for a wide range of new reactor applicants. Next slide, please. And Prasad, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, this is the operational
Oh,
program.
I'm sorry. Correct. Forgive me. Part 53.
So yeah, we can go on to the next slide, and you know,
No, I've got it. I got it. So with slide 19, Part 53 should require applicants to describe operational programs that emphasize and reinforce industry best practices. An appropriate level of detail for each program may vary depending on the reactor design. This slide lists a number of operational programs that may apply to new and advanced reactor designs. Fire protection, in-service inspection, and emergency preparedness programs are not included in this list, but they too represent additional examples of operational programs. Prescriptive and deterministic requirements for operational programs decrease applicant flexibility and increase regulatory burden. Next slide, please. Your turn, Prasad.
Okay. So, I mean, this is where I want to emphasize that risk-informed performance-based methods are, I believe, necessary in order to avoid unnecessary requirements and some kind of an NRC-approved decision-making framework that focuses on requirements management would be very helpful. And the guidance that is now available in UREC BR 0303 doesn't cover this, and this is where perhaps NRC can improve matters with regard to requirements management. But the lessons from the reactor oversight process and you know, the recent activities related to functional containment, I think would be very useful in this. So next slide. So let's get to where we are on part 53 now. You know, what I'll be covering relates to the subparts B, C, and F. Subpart B identifies safety requirements for applicants. The applicant is expected to show that acceptance criteria for the safety requirements will be met with margin. And the acceptance criteria are developed using subpart C. Subpart F can provide the means for managing margins by evidence developed during operations. So the success of Part 53 requires that you know, applicants see tangible benefits over existing approaches, and the Commission's vision for a performance-based approach in which there is an incentive structure would, I believe, promote the use of Part 53 if that were included in this effort. So, what this would do is allow transparent ways that applicants and licensees can confidently manage regulatory requirements. So basically what we are trying to point out is that subpart B requirements can be associated with the apex of the pyramid, and we need to recognize that there are multiple gaps between, you know, this vision of success and where we are right now. Next slide. So let's get into subpart B in a little more detail. The thing is, I'll be referring to actual sections of the rule language that have been issued, and there are backup slides which I won't be able to cover, but they give the actual rule language based on what's available right now. So you know, one can observe that there is a hierarchical relationship, you know, along the lines of NUREC BRO 303 that can be used in the provisions of subpart B, and there can be you know, better margins management made possible for improved outcomes. The highest level performance objectives are in the rule, this is 53.220, associated with design features and programmatic controls. These are the highest level performance elements. And you know, these are the highest level functional objective is in 53.230 alpha, and it's defined specifically to limit radioactivity release. So below the highest level in section 53.230 Bravo, there are additional safety functions. Appropriately, these are not prescribed, but they are given by example. The licensing basis events that are used to establish the capabilities associated with these safety functions then are, you know, reach down into the lower levels of the hierarchy and the system structures and components there. Next slide. So again, you know, this is again just reiterating that there's a hierarchical relationship. Next slide. This is actually a you know, something that represents a notional objectives hierarchy, and I've used the molten salt reactor concept in order to show how subpart B might work for something like this. So the highest level objective of reasonable assurance of adequate protection, you know, is again, you know, decomposed into reactor safety, radiation safety, and safeguards. And what is shown in green over here is what's I'm trying to reflect as parts of subpart B. Limiting radioactivity is at the higher level, and the functional objectives at the next lower level, you know, are shown as reactivity control, heat generation control, and heat removal and chemical interactions. And those can further be decomposed. But the point of this is that there is a relationship for decision-making in which the necessary and sufficient conditions for limiting radioactivity release is achieved by fulfilling the performance objectives in these other lower level performance elements. Similarly, for radiation safety, one can look at the public and occupational, and emergency preparedness might be considered part of the public radiation safety aspect, and safeguards similarly. One thing I want to point out is that this shows a performance element on programmatic controls off to a side. And that is similar to what we saw earlier as the mitigating systems functional support that is offered in the ROP. So that would be a separate a set of objectives hierarchies. Next slide. So moving to subpart C, which is on design analysis, design and analysis requirements. You know, the design of the physical features to meet the licensing basis event requirements will need to consider the human actions and programmatic controls. The functional design criteria specified can employ a performance-based approach to identify analytical margins that would be based on and supported by operational, would support operational flexibilities. And it should be possible for the license to indicate how incentives can be incorporated into margins management and improve safety outcomes. So this can be done if the methodology in UREC BR 0303 that considers physical and temporal margins are used in constructing the objectives hierarchy. The physical margins, usually by coding, by codes such as ASME, you know, they are generally quite robust and plentiful. The temporal margins would need to consider the details of the scenarios involved in the licensing basis events. And that's what would determine the programmatic controls. How this might work in the current Part 53 can be seen under the terms of 53.470, in which the acceptance criteria for the performance objectives can be included in an application to provide the basis for overall margins that can be used to improve safety outcomes. And incorporating incentives within the license will involve application of subpart F. Next slide. So the subpart F is requirements for operations. So you know, the requirements for operation should recognize that there is a continuity between design, analysis, and operation to validate margins and use the performance-based approach to reward licensees for strengths in maintenance, personnel skills, and recording of operational data to improve confidence in margins assessment. So these margins, as long as they're reliable, should enable relaxation of license conditions. Right now, Part 53, subpart F, has a one-sided nature to it. It seems to be applied only to increasing restrictions on licensed operations. Now, the formal use of a performance-based approach to encourage and reward improved outcomes might consider incentivization in this, in section 53.890. the regulatory construct should incorporate documentation and verification of the margins information to simplify a two-sided margins management program. And this, it should be possible to minimize the use of exemptions if this becomes part of the regulatory approach. Next slide. So in summary, a performance-based approach would be truly transformative because it would result in a framework that promotes logical arguments favoring improved safety outcomes. The aspiration to reduce prescription would be based on margins management over a wide range of levels of detail. A formal implementation of a performance-based approach is long-standing commission policy about reviewing designs and overseeing plant operations in a consistent and coherent manner. A performance-based approach in subparts B, C, and F can realize how prescription is can be reduced, and in fact, it can be achieved with the current rule structure if prescription is removed. And a successful Part 53 will provide the flexibility that is needed so that encouraging and rewarding improved outcomes becomes possible. So now I think I can open it up for questions. Pat, we have quite a number of questions in the chat.
That we do.
I don't know, are you able to sort of, identify them in terms of when they were submitted, just so we'll be able to answer them one by one?
I can go through them one by one. I can't say specifically what slide they may have posted the question on. I do believe the first question was regarding a white paper and if that was the same as the SECI paper cited. And I think you did answer that. I'll
Yes,
let you address.
Answer that. Let's go on to the next one.
Okay. Question is there any information on QA/QC requirement when using the RIPB approach?
Well, the current Part 53, has a whole subpart associated with that, I believe. So the answer is that there is current language, but to what extent it uses RIPB is, in my mind, uncertain. So my perception is that it doesn't make effective use of RIPB. Next question.
What is the basis for saying that less margin means more prescriptive requirement?
Well, I guess this is having seen in something like the reactor oversight process, how the concept of the objectives hierarchy would play out in practice. This is more an observation I offer, and to me it makes intuitive sense, and to some extent it also reflects why there is still it just seems to me that operating reactors have to deal with too many prescriptive requirements, and when I see the nature of those requirements, it sort of fits into where a performance-based approach has not been used effectively. So Next question.
Yes, the next question asks if there is a relationship between ITAC and performance-based approach. And there is a response from an individual saying they think it's purely incidental, that ITACs are simply how the NRC demonstrates compliance to construction requirements for new plants under Part 52. That's their take anyway.
Well, I mean, the fact is that the regulations in Part 52 say that you know, the summation, meeting all the ITACs is tantamount to meeting all the regulations. I'm not sure my recollection would be entirely correct, but I believe it's 5247, one of the provisions that says something like this. So the fact is that the existing regulations do include something that has the necessary and sufficient way of achieving a reasonable assurance of adequate protection. So next question.
Great, thank you. Next question is, there seems to be a common feeling, usually in non-PRA communities, that a risk-informed approach introduces more workload and overweighs its potential benefit. How can we defend when this point is brought up?
Well, I would suggest that the way to defend it is to say that you know, we need risk-informed and performance-based approaches to complement one another and work together. And there shouldn't be too much emphasis on the risk-informed part of it, as at least is my observation over the past, you know, a couple of decades, I would say. So that's just my view on it. So next question.
Thank you. The next question really is where to find the link for RP3C and the recordings. If you go to the ANS public website, ans.org, you want to look at the standards menu and look for RP3C, and then you can scroll down and you'll find the information.
Well, it's on here also, Pat. If you go down further in the slide package, you know, you'll see there's
Slide 33. Yes.
Yeah. So the very last slide has the links.
That would be this right here, the public website here, the direct link. And then this site up here is the public site for the community of practice. So, okay, we'll go on to the next question. The next question is, I was just thinking that since PB requires specification of performance objectives, presumably specifying the objective evidence that demonstrates compliance with the objectives would also be needed and approach suspiciously similar in concept to ITAC. If so, I'd expect there are a lot of lessons learned, good and bad, with Part 52 applications that would be useful.
Exactly. I entirely agree with that comment. I don't know if it was a question, but yes, I think that's exactly what needs to be learned from Part 52. And, you know, and that's what I would offer as something that what's called Framework B should take into account. That's Framework Bravo. And I don't see that that's happened. So, but that's my own view on it. So next question.
Okay, next question is, what is an NRC approved decision-making framework?
Well, an NRC approved decision-making framework is what the ROP is. That's the Reactor Oversight process. You know, the Reactor Oversight process did not go through any rulemaking. It is just a decision-making framework that uses all the evidence that's developed within the operating reactor community and it is used to make a decision every day for each licensee whether they offer reasonable assurance of adequate protection. I mean, this is where Rani has firsthand knowledge on this. And Rani, if you have something to say, I invite you.
Sure. Thank you, Prasad. I would just add that the approval comes in the form of commission policy. And the commission, of course, established the reactor oversight process through policy, through SECI papers and SRMs, and there are manual chapters and inspection procedures that govern. And the decision-making processes for the ROP, how much inspection does each plant get based on inspection findings and performance indicator data that each licensee submits. So hopefully that's responsive to the question.
Well, hey, this is Jim August. I asked the question. My real purpose in asking that is that you have standards like NEI 1804 that specify decision-making frameworks. And to me, that is not consistent with the intent of this whole approach. It's telling you how to make decisions. So that's my observation.
Thank you, Jim. Next question.
Thank you. Next, it may be more of a statement mixed with a question. A performance-based approach can be supported by a set of requirements that manages the risk either prescriptively or by using risk-informed approaches. That is, guidance in, I believe it's new reg BR 0303 is not adequate on its own. So the question is, for those that would like to manage the risk using the RI approach, how do we establish the performance objectives of the requirements?
I mean, I guess a beginning can be made with NUREG VR 0303, but what I tried to point out is that in terms of managing requirements, NUREG VR 0303 goes only part of the way. What it points to is the use of margins. So, how to employ actual margins that can be observed using just the risk-informed kind of processes that are currently used, that remains something that needs to be looked at and done. So it's sort of an open question right now, is the way I see it. Next question.
Okay, and right now this is the last question. How do you show you have margins and how much margin a design has if the performance objectives are not expressed quantitatively?
Well, the performance objectives can be expressed objectively by a combination of qualitative and quantitative measures. And some of this is dealt with, again, at a high level in NUREG BR 0303, and the two supporting research products that I tried to show, that's NUREG CR 5392 and NUREG CR 6833. Most recently, I would say the ANS standard 30.3 that was just issued and got ANSI approval, also offers some details. So this is ANS 30.3 is going to be submitted for NRC endorsement. And I would say that might go some ways in enabling better use of this this methodology. So any other questions? We still have about 3 minutes. So if people want to ask questions, on the let's see, there's something from Hillary Lane. I can't read it. Perhaps Pat,
Sure. She just, it was kind of an FYI. NRC's preliminary proposed rule comment period closes on August 31st. She strongly encourages everyone to submit their comments and recommendations.
Okay, yeah, that's a good public service announcement. Thank you, Hillary. So I mean, I really appreciate everybody joining in this community of practice session. You know, we try to keep the whole presentation and discussion to an hour, and I think we have accomplished that. Again, if there are any other questions or comments you have, you know, I'll be glad to get them. You know, in the like 2 minutes that we have, I invite you know, perhaps someone from NRC. I know that Candice de Messier was on. I don't know if she's still on. If you'd like to say something, Candice, you know, I would appreciate whatever comment you have to offer. So.
Thank you, Prasad. I appreciate that. And I also acknowledge Bill Reckley, who's on as well from the NRC. And I have no comments, just appreciate your interest in the ongoing development of the preliminary proposed rule language for Part 53. Thank you.
And certainly, Bill, anything you have to say would also be appreciated. So.
Yeah, thank you, Prasad. Nothing specific. If people wanted to see a little bit of how this was proposed 10 years ago or more, NEI 0202, which was a previous effort on Part 53, basically built off of the ROP cornerstones as well. So it has a history. It's been thought of before. So you can take a look there.
Okay, thank you all. Appreciate your participation. And Pat, I think we can call this session to a close. Thank you.
Thank you all.